I created a YouTube channel a while ago where I explore creepy places around my country and document it. People seem to enjoy my content, and I quickly grew a stable viewer base. Little did I know that one special trip would almost end my life. In one of my recent videos, I asked my viewers to suggest new creepy locations for my upcoming video. After receiving numerous replies, I decided to take a look at them a few days later. Among thousands of replies, only a few were actual locations I could visit. Most suggestions were typical, like forests, abandoned houses, and old schools, places I had already been to. However, one comment stood out from the rest. The Lost Soul suggested a location with Google Maps coordinates. I copied and pasted them, confirming it was an abandoned underground subway. Curious about the subway's story, I researched and discovered it had been closed for a long time. More intriguingly, locals reported it as haunted, claiming they could hear the screams of the 3 people lost inside its narrow passages. I thought it was the perfect location for my next video. I packed my equipment and called John, my cameraman, and Justin, my editor, both childhood friends. The subway wasn't far from where I lived, about a 2-hour car drive. We arrived at midnight, and the area was eerily calm, with no one around as the subway's entry was remote from the city. The main gate was securely locked, but in our clout-chasing fashion, we decided to pry it open using a crowbar from our equipment. Entering the subway, the darkness was overwhelming. You couldn't see your hands in front of your face. We turned on the camera and used our flashlights as we ventured deeper inside. We spent the next few hours exploring the subway, documenting our journey, attempting to capture anything paranormal. Unfortunately, we encountered nothing but some creaking voices here and there, which is quite expected in such an old place. As we decided to call it a day, we made our way to leave the subway. Little did we know what awaited us. Upon reaching the main gate we entered through, we discovered it completely locked once again from the outside. It felt as if we never pried it open. We kicked the gate, knocked, screamed, but nothing seemed to work. Spending over 2 hours desperately trying to open the gate, we attempted to pry it, but it felt as if a massive boulder blocked the other side. We decided to split up and search for another exit. Armed with flashlights and cell phones, we individually scoured the area, planning to regroup at the subway center an hour later. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of strange encounters. As I walked the narrow passages of the subway, a piercing scream shattered the eerie silence. I recognized it as Justin's. Terrified, I sprinted towards the sound, only to find both Justin and John waiting for me. "Are you okay?" they asked, concerned. I shifted my gaze to Justin. "Are you okay? I heard you screaming." Justin denied it. It turns out we all heard different screams. I heard Justin, Justin heard John, and John heard me. We all ran towards each other, thinking someone was in trouble. Feeling uneasy, we decided not to split again and search together. We spent hours trying to find an exit, but the place felt like an extraordinarily vast maze for a normal subway. The 3 of us grew seriously concerned about our safety there. Our situation worsened as hours turned into days and days into weeks. Unprepared for an extended stay, we found ourselves running low on food and water. However, the most unsettling aspect was the eerie sightings near our sleeping area. A mysterious woman walking along the train tracks every single night. Despite our pleas for help, she would only pause briefly before fleeing. This tall figure, standing at approximately 7 feet, eluded our flashlight beams each time we attempted to illuminate the area. Our situation deteriorated further Phones and flashlights were draining their batteries. Despite our desperate attempts to find an exit, our efforts proved futile every single time. Thoughts of imminent starvation haunted my mind, pushing me to the brink of madness. At one point, I even questioned my sanity as I started hearing voices warning me of a bleak fate. "You will never escape. This is your end," were the sentences I had to deal with 24/7. Days passed, and our light of hope got slowly fainter. One day, as we were about to leave to find a way out again, John decided to give up and remain in the subway center. He looked so sick and was barely able to move or speak to us. We decided to leave him have some rest there while we continued the search for an exit. But upon our return, we were met with a shocking sight. Approaching John's location, a putrid smell overwhelmed us, accompanied by disturbing squeaks. As things started getting more visible, the sight before us was enough to shatter our sanity. Dozens of enormous rats formed a dark cloud around John, suffocating him and devouring his flesh. Despite my futile attempt to save him, we were too late. There was nothing but leftovers of the John we knew. His guts were pulled outside of his stomach. His eye sockets were empty as the rats devoured his eyeballs. We barely recognized him. I looked around, cold sweat running down my body, feeling that I was going to blank, and then I spotted the woman we had been seeing lurking in the shadows, as if she enjoyed observing our despair. Completely desperate, I fell to my knees. I begged her to help us escape. Meanwhile, Justin stood motionless on John's lifeless body, his vacant eyes fixated on the gruesome scene unfolding before him. But we immediately decided to leave the place and find somewhere else to stay, not too far from this area, as it was the only place close enough to the gate where we could yell whenever we heard someone walking by. Each of us stood in a corner. Justin and I knew that we were going to die sooner or later. We didn't say a word. We just sat there, as if we were waiting for our inevitable fate. Without realizing it, I passed out from fatigue and starvation. Once I woke up, what I saw made cold sweat course over my body. I saw Justin leaning over John's body, using his hands to rip John's rotting flesh and devour it. As I yelled at him, he stood up and slowly started approaching me. I noticed that he was holding our crowbar in his hand, and the look he gave me completely explained his intentions. Afraid for my own life, I ran away, hearing Justin's footsteps right behind me as he chased me. Eventually, I lost him, finding myself somewhere I had never been inside this subway. The thoughts and encounters became more and more frequent. The woman that I had seen now started getting closer to me every time I saw her, almost pressed against my face, yet I was still unable to discern her features. I even started repeatedly seeing John crying and asking me why I didn't save him. The voices I heard were getting louder, and every time I heard an echo, I thought Justin was there to kill me. I wished I would die at that point, but my survival instinct saved me every time. I recall biting pieces of flesh off my forearms and using them as bait to manually catch the rats that tried to eat it. I would hit them against the wall, killing them, and then eat them raw. The wounds on my arms started getting infected, and I finally decided to completely give up and accept my death. I went to one of the corners and lay down, tears running through my cheeks as I prayed for God to forgive me for everything bad I've done. As I lay there, John, Justin, the woman I had been seeing, and two other people I didn't recognize, all stood on top of my head. I could see their lips moving, but I couldn't hear a word they said. "Are those dead people?" I thought to myself as I closed my eyes, and that's all I could recall. The next time I woke up was inside the intensive care unit. Later on, I found out that many of my local viewers, concerned for my sudden disappearance, formed little teams and went to look for me in the places suggested in my last video. They finally found and saved me. Unfortunately, Justin and John weren't as lucky as I was. 10 years ago, I decided to go on vacation to Kenya. My main plan was to enjoy the lovely safari, spot a few animals, take some photos, and then head back home. Little did I know that my seemingly simple trip would turn into a horror story for me to share. During that time, I traveled alone, as I wasn't married, and my friends weren't interested in my chosen destination. After booking the flight, I found myself in Kenya a few hours later. The initial days were absolutely amazing as I spent time with other tourists from Europe, and together we hired a tourist guide to explore the magic of the country. Safaris, lions, cheetahs, and hippos. We witnessed it all. However, as the days passed, tourists gradually left, and our once large group dwindled, leaving me almost entirely alone most of the day. I had to spend the remainder of my vacation traveling around the country on my own, relying on my map, phone, and my very limited Swahili language skills. One day, I decided to visit a city about 3 hours away from my hotel. While enjoying my time exploring the area, I lost track of time and suddenly realized it was 6 p.m. I rushed to the nearest bus stop, hoping to catch a ride, but after waiting for 2 hours, there were no signs of any buses. I asked locals, who informed me that the buses stopped running at 5:30 p.m., leaving me in a predicament. As the place grew darker, I turned to Google Maps on my phone for a solution. I discovered a train station approximately 3 miles away from my location. Left with no other options, I decided to walk there, even though I knew it would take about an hour in the darkness. Upon arriving, the train station appeared entirely deserted, with no signs of human presence. The area felt isolated, surrounded by no houses, and I began to question if I had lost my way. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I cautiously approached the station, a dilapidated, abandoned-looking wooden cabin. The train tracks were very rusty, seemingly unused for decades, and there was minimal illumination, forcing me to rely entirely on my phone's torch. Quickly, my ears started picking up some strange voices emanating from inside the small station's cabin. It seemed like people were talking, but I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. I thought they might be my only hope for information about the train. As I approached the cabin, the voices became more audible, accompanied by faint screams and desperate cries. I had to remain low and cautious. Upon reaching the cabin, I crouched under one of its windows, attempting to overhear what was happening inside. After a moment, I decided to peek inside, and what I witnessed was horrifying. The cabin appeared to be a location where some people practiced some form of witchcraft. Inside, I saw a person standing in a large bowl. He looked European, possibly a tourist. 3 other males, who seemed to be Kenyans, were lighting pieces of wood under the bowl, resembling a gruesome cooking scene. The appearance of these individuals was terrifying, with red eyeballs and animal bone piercings through their noses. They jumped and danced around the man, seemingly possessed. Sometimes they screamed and laughed loudly. I soon noticed that inside the bowl were some animals, resembling large mantis shrimp. As the water slowly boiled and the man's screams intensified as his skin burnt, the shrimp tried to escape the heat by burrowing into the man's body. The gruesome scene unfolded with the shrimp forcing themselves into the man's mouth, bulging down his throat. Others ripped open his neck or stomach, making their way into his guts. The water turned red, as the tourist apparently died slowly and painfully. To make matters worse, one of the 3 witches used a stone knife to skin the man's scalp. He then proceeded to rub it all over his body, painting himself in the tourist's blood. Overwhelmed by the sight and concerned for my own safety, I ran through the dense forest until the sun rose. Eventually, I made my way back to a nearby village, where I reported the incident to the authorities and immediately headed to the airport, leaving the country behind, oblivious to the rest of what happened that night.